Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the murder of Skylar Neese. This was a suggested case by Natasha, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have. I'd just like to let you know that I mean no disrespect to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've just gathered the information off the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. Skylar Annette Neese was born on the 10th of February in 1996 and she lived in Star City, West Virginia in America. Her parents were called Mary and David Neese and she was their only child. She was described as such a bubbly and compassionate girl who was also very intelligent, can be quite stubborn at times, but was just such a big personality that kind of everyone really wanted to hang around with and just loved to be around really. She loved to read, she had an active kind of social life on social media. Like most teenagers do, she loved putting lots of posts about her thoughts and basically her life on social media. She grew up and went to school in Sheath Lake, West Virginia. And when she was in second grade, at the age of 8, she met a girl called Sheila Ray Eddy. Sheila was actually 5 months older than her, born on the 28th of September 1995 to Tara and Greg, and she was an only child just like Skylar. They hit it off immediately. They became the best of friends. The pair actually started high school together in 2010, and not long after that they met a girl called Rachel Shove. Rachel was born on the 10th of June in 1996 to Rusty and Patricia, and like Skylar and Sheila, she too was an only child. Now Rachel didn't really have the same kind of things in common with the other two girls. She was an aspiring singer and dancer and she was very religious, but they hit it off anyway and the three of them would become very close friends. Now Skylar was actually an honour student at University High School and she wanted to become a criminal lawyer when she was older. She had a part-time job working at Wendy's food restaurant with 2 of her friends. So these 3 girls, they began hanging out with each other and they kind of started misbehaving in a sense, but a lot of teenagers do it. So they started drinking, they started to smoke a bit of weed, they would skip school and things like that. But it was pretty much said that Sheila was the bad influence on the other 2. Say Skylar's other friends, sometimes they wouldn't hang out with Skylar because if she was hanging out with Sheila, they just didn't like her. She was this bad influence and they didn't want to be around her, so they just wouldn't hang out with Skylar. And Rachel's friends also said the same thing. They attributed to the changes in Rachel's personality as basically being down to Sheila. Obviously, Skylar had been friends with Sheila for a very long time now, since they were 8. So she wasn't just going to drop a friend because other people said that she was a bad influence. Rachel, on the other hand, was a lot more popular. She didn't really need Sheila to be popular. So the only reason people thought as to why she really liked to hang out with Sheila was because that with Sheila, she could kind of break the rules. She was kind of this religious person and she had these friends who were of the same beliefs and things like that. And with Sheila, she could, like I said, break the rules and be more rebellious. Everything between the 3 was absolutely brilliant for a while. And that was until in late 2011, the girls attended a sleepover. And it ended up with Rachel and Sheila partaking in sexual activities together. It was very awkward for Skylar because she was kind of just left there to watch as they had sex together, and it did end up with Sheila and Skylar having this huge argument at the end of it. That was where the rift kind of started to begin to form. Not only that, Skylar started growing more apart from the 2, and the other 2 grew just even more closer. They actually kind of viewed Skylar as this really immature child that would just follow him around, and they were sexually active, they had boyfriends, and Skylar didn't, so they thought they were more mature than she was. Just classic high school drama pretty much, but this high school drama turned brutal. They even began dressing similar, so Sheila and Rachel would wear the same kind of clothes, and they would never include Skylar. She just felt like she was getting more and more shoved out of the picture, and they were just pushing her further away. This all really did start when Rachel came into the scene because before that their relationship was just solid. There was one huge problem with growing so far apart though in their eyes because Skylar knew pretty much all of their secrets best friends do. They tell each other everything, they tell the secrets, they don't want anyone else to know. And Skylar did hint about this on social media quite a lot. One tweet actually read, "I tell the whole school all the shit I have on everyone," which is a lot. Hashtag if I could get away with it. The pair began to argue so much over Twitter and social media, and this would only get worse over time, and she would tweet a lot about it. In June 2012, Skylar and Sheila went on this trip to Myrtle Beach for a week, and they basically argued the entire time they were there. And when the pair got home, Sheila turned to Rachel and she decided that, well, Skylar needed to die. And apparently this hadn't just come from the beach trip. There was things that the teachers overheard, that the pair were actually talking of how the best way to dispose of a body, and this was in October of 2011. However, you may think, why didn't the teachers act on it? Well, at the time there had been a body discovered not too far away from town, so I guess they just kind of thought that they were talking about that. And because this body had been discovered, it had led people to talk about these strange sorts of things, and they weren't too worried about it. And if you recall, in 2011, this was when the kind of rift between the girls had first been started. So whether the body being found was the actual reason behind it, or they were actually thinking about it back then, I just don't know. One student also overheard the pair talking about trying to hide Skylar's body in particular. This student did go on and tell Skylar, but Skylar just said, oh, well, they're just messing around, they're just joking. She did confront them, and they basically said the same. They just told her that they were messing around. And Skylar believed them. She took it at face value, and she believed them. Most people would. But as you will come to learn, it certainly was not the case. It certainly was not a joke. I also found video, which I believe Skylar had taken, of all three girls playing this game. And in this game, they were all discussing kind of like a would you rather game, but instead of would you rather normal things, it was would you rather get shot or strangled or something like that. It was ways in which you'd rather die rather than the normal idea of the game.
Would you guys rather suffocate or get shot?
Get shot.
Shot. Wait, depends on where.
Would you rather in the head?
Shot.
There would be no suffering at all.
Eaten by ants or suffocated?
Suffocated.
Drowning or suffocating?
Suffocating. It's almost the same thing.
I know, but it's not.
Right
Because
in
if
their head.
you were on a pillow.
So there may be a few warning signs throughout this case, and there was more. Like in 2012, another pupil heard one of them say that she wouldn't mind it if Skylar had died. She was actually worried that Skylar might blackmail her, and this was her response to that worry. She also stated in science class we should kill her, and Sheila actually nodded in response. It's just horrible to think how many actual small signs there were, and how long they could have potentially been planning this, and how long they'd actually thought about it. They were only teenagers themselves. Regardless of all of these things that they were saying, they still hung out. Even though Skylar's relationship with the pair was disintegrating, she still classed Sheila as her best friend. But what Skylar didn't know was she didn't have a clue what her best friend was actually capable of. She literally had no idea. The day before Skylar was killed, she actually tweeted, "You doing shit like this is why I can never completely trust you." Her actual last tweet was sent out in the hours before she left her house, and it was a retweet from a friend who had posted, "All I do is hope." So on the 5th of July in 2012, Skylar went home at around about 10 p.m. She'd finished her shift at Wendy's and off she went home. When she got home, she basically kissed her parents goodnight, she said "I love yous," and off she went up to her room. Little did her parents know that that would be the last time they would ever see their daughter alive again. And she was just 16 years old. At around midnight, Sheila had sent her some messages and calls and things like that. They were basically trying to convince her to come out. They wanted Skylar to sneak out with them, and she'd been falling out with a pair, and she was very hesitant at first. The relationship for a while now had been very rocky. But at around about 12:30 a.m, she decided that she was going to go. She climbed out of a bedroom window, put this kind of bench underneath it, and got into Sheila's sedan across the street. The complex's CCTV caught her as she left and got into this car. She left her house that night thinking that she was going to sneak out, have a really good time with her friends, and just enjoy her night. But what she didn't know was what was actually in the boot of Sheila's car and what the girls actually had planned. Because let me tell you, it was not a night full of fun. So what Sheila did have in her boot was a shovel, some fresh clothes, towels, and bleach. The three girls then headed northwest from Star City towards Blackville via US Route 19. They'd actually planned to travel along BW Route 7 but ended up turning back when they came across a state police car that was parked outside of a gambling lounge. They eventually did arrive at their destination though, just across the Pennsylvanian state border, which was a familiar spot to all three of the girls. They'd often go there to smoke cannabis, and it was just one of them spots that they knew really well. As you probably are aware by now, Sheila and Rachel had been planning Skylar's murder for months now. They all got out of the car, and that was when one of the girls turned to Skylar and said, "Oh, I forgot my lighter." So Skylar turned her back on them to go and get her own lighter from the car. This is when the girls counted to 3, which was their pre-arranged signal that they spoke about, and they began to stab Skylar with the kitchen knives that they had hidden in their hoodies. Now Skylar tried to run, but unfortunately she was tackled by Rachel. The pair struggled with each other, and Skylar did manage to wrestle the knife from Rachel, and she did manage to cut just above her ankle in self-defense. However, there were 2 of them, and once Sheila joined back in, Skylar really didn't stand a chance. She was already injured, and then with Sheila joining in once more, they just stabbed her repeatedly. They then stood over her as they watched her life drain away before their eyes, and the last word that she could muster was why. They stood over her until there was complete silence, and in Rachel's own words, until Skylar's neck stopped making gurgling sounds. And this totally just broke my heart in two. Just looking into this case, she tried really hard to fight, and she tried to run, but she just couldn't. She was just overwhelmed and murdered brutally by her apparent 2 best friends. And her last words to them was asking them why they'd done it. It's just horrible. So the pair then went and got shovels from the boot. They decided that they were going to bury her near to the road. When they actually started digging, they didn't realise how hard the ground was and how many rocks the ground had in it. Therefore the shovel wouldn't get through it. They couldn't dig a hole. So instead they dragged the body next to a tree, where they then proceeded to cover her with dirt, rocks and branches. They also left her phone next to her, but the phone was actually switched off. Once they'd done, they washed themselves off in a creek. They disposed of their bloodied clothes and the murder weapons. They went back to the car, they got into the new change of clothes, tried cleaning everything up, and then off they went back home like nothing had ever happened. The next day, Skylar's parents left for work early. Her door was closed. They just assumed that she was still asleep. Didn't really think much of it. It was only when David came home at around lunchtime, he was going to have his lunch and he was dropping off the car so that Skylar could take it for her shift at Wendy's at 4 p.m. that day, when he realised that nobody was home. So he went upstairs to check on Skylar. She wouldn't normally have slept in this long, so he went to see whether she was there to wake her up, whatever. He realised that her door was locked from the inside, and eventually he did see the bench and the open window, so he realised that she'd snuck out that night. He went on to call Mary, his wife, asking if she'd seen her or heard of her or anything like that, that she wasn't home. And Mary told her to ring Sheila, her best friend, to see whether she knew anything about it, whether she had seen her. So David did, he rang Sheila. Sheila said that she spoke to her around midnight on the phone, but that was that. She'd not seen her, she didn't know anything about it. So he rang Mary back. Mary then gave him a few different names to try and call of like Skylar's friends and things. So he tried them. Nobody knew anything, nobody had seen her. Initially, Mary did think that she was out shopping or something with her friends, that everything was okay. So what they basically decided on was that Skylar would never ever miss work, ever. So her shift was at 4 o'clock. They were going to see and ring her work to see whether she actually turned up. So that was what they did. When Mary got home from work, she was just about to ring Wendy's when she got a phone call through from Wendy's asking if Skylar was going to come to work today. That was when they got so worried. And this is when Sheila changed the story. Sheila actually rang back 15 minutes later. She stated that they'd gone and picked up Skylar at 11 o'clock. They'd joyrided around for an hour, less than an hour, and dropped her off again before midnight. She dropped her off at the end of the street, which Skylar requested because she didn't want to wake her parents up and get in trouble, and that was the last she'd seen of her. And obviously this was before midnight, so they panicked and they immediately called the police. Not long after that, Tara arrived at the Neese's household with her daughter Sheila. They were upset, they were wanting to look for her, they were wanting to just do anything they could to just help in the search. They sort of went round asking neighbours and things like that, anybody close by, to see if anyone had seen anything. But no one had. Mary then realised that the landlord had actually recently installed cameras, so she asked for the footage and he provided it. They obviously went to around midnight because that was when they would see Skylar coming home. At around 12:30, that's when they saw Skylar leaving, crossing the road and getting into this car, this silver car, which at the time nobody realised it was actually Sheila's. They didn't know who it belonged to. They didn't have any reason not to believe Sheila at the time, so nobody rewound the footage, nobody went to check to see whether Sheila's story was actually truth. They just simply saw their daughter get into this stranger's car and now she was missing. I don't know why it wasn't recognised as Sheila's car initially, but having watched the footage, it was very grainy and the car was quite far away. You couldn't make out the licence plate, so that could have been the reason why. So when the city police came around, they watched the footage and they came to the conclusion that Skylar was a runaway. She seemingly willingly got into this stranger's car. They figured that she'd gone off with this boy or something like that, and that she would be back, which, as you guys know, is so far from the truth. Her parents did everything they could. They put out missing persons flyers, they went onto the media, they did pleas on social media, just trying to get the word out of the daughter and see if anyone's seen anything. Basically telling her that if she was out there, she weren't going to get in trouble, they just wanted her home. And it was all they could do really, because every time they rang the police, city police, they simply got the answer that they couldn't do anything because she was a runaway and the only thing they could do was follow up on tips that they were receiving, but that was about it. Basically, they thought she'd come back. So as the weeks went by, Sheila was putting on a very fake friend front to everyone because she didn't want to be caught. So she was posting on social media how much she loved and missed her best friend and wanted her just to come home. And I truly can't understand how people could just blatantly fake it like that. She seemed to feel no remorse, nothing about the life she'd taken. She was just putting on this false person, trying to pretend that she missed her friend when actually she had murdered her. The FBI did end up getting involved in this investigation, and on the 9th of July, along with the investigators, the FBI interviewed Sheila. She stuck to her story like she would, but she seemed to be more interested in what was happening in the investigation, where they were up to, than her best friend's safe return. That was when a detective noticed that Sheila actually owned a silver sedan, which could potentially tie her in with this unknown vehicle that was on the CCTV footage. And Rachel, they also wanted to speak to Rachel, but Rachel was at church camp when they actually contacted her, and she claimed that she knew nothing about Skylar going missing. She had just stabbed her friend to death for no real reason, and she was at church camp. Seriously. They arranged it so that Rachel was supposed to go for an interview when she came back, but she never did. And when they finally did manage to get an interview, she literally, word for word, said the exact same story as Sheila as to what had happened. Now, the interviewer did actually sort of notice that it was kind of like it was rehearsed. It was pretty much word for word, and it seemed more like rehearsed than somebody speaking of their own words. Regardless, they didn't really have much to go on. Also, it's worth noting that there was never an Amber Alert sent out for Skylar, because she seemingly got into this car herself. They thought she was a runaway, not that she'd actually been kidnapped. So the public weren't really keeping their eyes open for this missing child because the police didn't put out this Amber Alert. So there was just not much to go on, really. School kind of resumed about a month later. And it was completely out of character for Skylar to just get in the car with a stranger and not tell anyone where she was going or where she was. She also left her personal items behind. Things like her window was left open and the bench was left there because she had every intention of coming back. She also left personal items inside the house, which you used on a daily basis. Things you would have definitely taken if you were gonna run away, for instance. Things like contact lenses and your phone charger, essential daily items that you would definitely take. They were still there. Mary began to get very displeased with how the case was being handled. Nothing was really being done. After 2 months, the city police just weren't doing anything, so she called the state police, who decided to take on the case. They immediately applied for warrants to try and access Sheila and Rachel's kind of phone records and their emails and things like that. And they re-went over this CCTV footage several times before they eventually realised that Sheila didn't pick up Skylar at 11 like she said she had. She was lying. At least about that. Now, Sheila, like I said, was trying to act all innocent. She was trying to get closer to the Neeses. She would basically go around with her crocodile tears, pretending to be so upset. She would just ask them about the case and things like that, and they would tell her because she was the best friend. Surely she had nothing to do with it. But the investigators did tell them to not give any information out to anyone, like especially not Sheila, because she may be a suspect. And so they stopped. This was when she tried to get other people to do it for her. The fakery of it all was more like an agenda to try and get as much information as she could, because obviously she wanted to get away with it. The school began to buzz with rumours and things like that. It was everywhere. Everyone knew about the girls. The 3 of them were always together. So there was rumours going around like Rachel and Sheila had left Skylar after she'd had a drug overdose and they just left her to die. Things like that. And although Sheila was kind of very much inserting herself fully into the investigation, Rachel was the complete opposite. She was trying to hide away from it all. She didn't want to hear anything. She had a proper guilty conscience. She was just trying to hide her head in the sand and just keep away from it all. Sheila didn't really show any signs of cracking, but Rachel was pretty much at bursting point, especially with all the rumours flying around school like every day. She just tried everything to keep away because she was basically just falling apart. The police noticed how Rachel's behaviour had changed. And so they kind of pushed her into changing her statement. This is when they basically told her that they had a phone records, that they'd not spoke about Skylar after she'd gone missing between each other, which you would do. You'd be worried about your friend, you'd be texting each other. There weren't any of that. They could kind of track the whereabouts to a degree. And with the CCTV footage not matching with what they said, she did change her statement. They knew these girls were lying about something at least. So Rachel changed the story. She said that they went out, yes, and Skylar ran away. She ran away into the woods. They chased after her, they couldn't find her, she never came back, and so they went home. Now, Sheila also changed her story, but that was only after she heard that Rachel had changed hers. And their stories matched once more. On the 16th of December in 2012, which was 5 months after Skylar had gone missing, her mother Mary still didn't really know what had happened. She had these suspicions and things like that. She posted this very lengthy Facebook message and she wanted people to share it. It kind of stated everything she knew. It put suspicion on both Rachel and Sheila. And I do believe it did state that she feared that her daughter had been killed. And in response to this, Sheila and Rachel were bombarded with all these tweets from all these different people. The whole community suspected them, and this is just a few of the many they actually received. This really had a huge impact on Rachel's mental health. She ended up having an argument with her parents. She locked herself in a room and threatened to kill herself. She was actually sectioned under the Mental Health Act and she was hospitalised for a while. On the 3rd of January 2012, the police took Rachel in for questioning after she'd come home. They only asked her a few questions before she admitted that they had stabbed Skylar. She told them everything, and when they asked why she'd done it, she couldn't really think of anything. The only thing that she said was, "We didn't like her anymore. You didn't like her anymore, so you killed her." This case is truly heartbreaking. Rachel agreed to take them to where the body was, the spot which they'd gone that night. And when they went there, she couldn't exactly find the exact location. It was covered in snow, and so they had to wait for the snow to melt. So they now knew what had happened to Skylar, but they didn't have the body, so they didn't really have the evidence to kind of convict the pair. With the body still in the snow, they decided that they were going to set up kind of Rachel's room with these devices, listening devices, because obviously Rachel just got home. Sheila would definitely want to see her friend. She did meet up, but unfortunately Sheila didn't say anything that could implicate herself or Rachel. On the 16th of January, 2 weeks later, the police went out to the spot again. This time they brought dog units and they were searching the area for Skylar's body. When a GPS system kind of fell off a dog, a police officer actually picked it up to replace it back on the dog, and that's when he saw skeletal remains under some branches. A whole 6 months after she had gone missing, Skylar's body was finally found. They began gathering all the evidence they could. They even put a search warrant out for Sheila to try and gather any knives that she had in her home or in a car. On the 13th of March, they confirmed that the skeletal remains they had found were definitely Skylar Neese's. They also let it out to the public. The post-mortem revealed that Skylar had been stabbed 50 times. 50 times by her 2 best friends. Oh. And on that same day that her body was discovered, Sheila posted the following Facebook message. The girls were pretty much allowed to roam free for almost a year, while the investigators were gathering up all this evidence to basically convict them. On the 1st of May, Rachel surrendered herself. She had her first day in court, and she agreed to testify against Sheila in return for 20 years for second-degree murder. Sheila was arrested shortly after. On the 4th of September, Sheila pleaded not guilty to murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. On the 24th of January 2014, at her pre-hearing trial, Sheila began crying at the sight of seeing David, Skylar's dad, before the trial had even begun. She later changed her plea to guilty on first-degree murder. She was actually sentenced to 15 years to life with the possibility of parole after 15 years, which personally I do not think is enough. They stabbed her 50 times. 50! I know she was a minor, but I don't know, I feel like she should have got more. And so does Skylar's father, because he swore that he's going to attend every single parole hearing she has, and he's going to make sure that she never walks free for what she did to his beloved daughter. On the 2nd of February, Rachel's sentencing began, and she accepted her sentence of 30 years for second-degree murder, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Both are currently serving their sentences at Lacking Correctional Centre. Skylar's case did actually cause some changes to the Amber Alert. Like I said, there was no Amber Alert actually put out on Skylar's case because her circumstances didn't meet the 4 criteria, so it was never actually sent out. They presented Skylar's Law, in which if an Amber Alert would be issued when a child is reported as missing and in danger, regardless as to whether the child is believed to have been kidnapped. The law was actually passed and put into use in May of 2013. This case is just so tragic and really frightening to say the least. These 2 16-year-old girls stabbed 50 times another 16-year-old girl to death with no real motive, just because they decided that they didn't like her anymore. It's just unreal. My heart really goes out to the Neese's family. They lost their daughter forever. They'll never get to see her grow up. They'll never get to see her turn into this beautiful woman and raise a family of her own.
They didn't want to be friends with her anymore, which is sick. You know, if you don't want to be friends with somebody, leave them alone, but don't murder them.
What do you want to say to these 2 girls?
Rotten hell. How's that? Because that's exactly what I wanted them to do.
But my heart also goes out to the other girls' families too, Sheila and Rachel's, because they also had to come to the terms with the fact that their daughter had committed this evil crime And it's just awful. You would never ever think that your own daughter would be capable of such a thing. If you guys have any more suggested cases, please do let me know. I'll look into them for you. If you like this video, please give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for similar content. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the murder of Skylar Neese. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!